My name is Lena Harris, and I'm 30 years old. I spent most of my life in the shadow of my stepfather, David Carter, a billionaire mogul with a tight grip on the fashion industry. But unlike him, I'm not a Carter. I'm a Gray, and no matter how hard I try, it's always felt like a curse. Ethan, my half-brother, has always been the golden child. He has the looks, the charm, and the approval of David. As for me, I'm the one left behind, clinging to a business no one seems to respect. Harris Designs, a startup that was supposed to be my legacy, but at every turn it's been undermined, either by my family or the world itself. Sometimes I feel like a joke. Tonight, at the dinner, I wasn't expecting anything to be different. The Parisian restaurant gleamed with gold and crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the perfume of expensive cologne and the hum of high society chatter. But David, as usual, had to remind me where I stood. "She's my biggest mistake," David said, his words cutting through the room like a knife. The guests around the table stilled, their eyes flicking between us. "She thinks she can make something out of that little hobby of hers. A boutique at best." I felt my jaw clench as the room's attention turned on me. The usual pity from the others didn't help. Ethan sat beside me, shifting in his seat, his eyes avoiding mine. He'd stopped defending me months ago. My business, my dreams, it was all a running joke to David, to everyone. As David's laughter echoed, I froze. My champagne glass halted midair. That's when I heard the deep, gravelly voice, louder than David's, as if the world itself had shifted. "Actually, that's my daughter." I whipped my head around. Maximilian Gray, the top client of Carter Enterprises, stood up. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto mine. For a split second, everything in the room seemed to freeze. Even David's smug face turned pale, like the last pieces of his world were about to come undone. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to shout at him for making a scene, but instead, I sat in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest. My real father, Maximilian Gray, the man who left me when I was a child, just exposed my most embarrassing secret. David had no idea. The room buzzed with whispers, but I couldn't hear a thing. My mind was reeling, spinning with one question that screamed louder than any of the others. "Why now?" "She's my daughter," Maximilian repeated, his voice calm, like he was stating an undeniable fact. His words were a sharp contrast to David's earlier mockery, and they shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew. Maximilian Gray, the businessman, the enigma, was suddenly my only ally. But for what purpose? David's expression morphed from shock to irritation. "What is this?" "A joke," he barked. Maximilian didn't flinch. "It's no joke, David," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But it seems the joke's been on you all along." My stomach churned. This dinner, the very one I dreaded, the one that was supposed to confirm the failure of Harris Designs, had just become something entirely different. I wasn't just Lena Harris, the daughter of David Carter's second wife. No, I was about to become a pawn in a game that neither my stepfather nor my father had seen coming. The air between Maximilian and David crackled, and suddenly I was more than just the woman in the corner. I was the woman at the center of a storm that no one could control, not even me. And yet, there was something dark in Maximilian's gaze, something unsettling. Was this all just a coincidence? Or had he been waiting for the perfect moment to bring me into this fight? I had no answers, only questions. But I knew one thing for sure. This dinner was the start of everything falling apart. "Maximilian," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing?" His lips curled into a knowing smile. "What I should have done years ago, Lena." He turned back to the table, leaving me there, on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. And just like that, I realized I had no idea what was coming next. The champagne glass in my hand trembled. The room buzzed with whispers as Maximilian Gray casually returned to his seat, like the declaration that he was my father wasn't shaking the foundation of my life. I stared at him, heart pounding in my chest. The words he'd just spoken echoed in my ears, drowning out the muffled clinks of cutlery on fine china. My father, the man who abandoned me as a child, had just set this chaotic fire in motion. David's face twisted in disbelief. "You're his daughter?" His voice was an icy, venomous hiss. "This is ridiculous." Maximilian's steely gaze remained fixed on him. "Not a joke, David. And it's about time you knew." I had never seen David lose control like this. The world's most powerful man, unraveling before me, his pride cracking. It should have felt like justice, but it didn't. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. Suddenly, all I could think about was the weight of the secret I had carried for years. "You should have told me earlier," I said, the words barely escaping my lips. Maximilian was still staring at David, but now his gaze flickered to me. "I don't think you're ready for everything yet," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "But we need to talk." His words were a knife to my ribs. A talk after all these years? It felt too late for that. David stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, the noise slicing through the tense air. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, pushing past me to storm out. He didn't even look back. The arrogance, the mockery, all of it was gone in an instant. The man who had controlled so many lives, now scrambling for an explanation he didn't have. The world was suddenly quieter, softer, but the silence was suffocating. Maximilian remained at the table, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around us. He took a long, slow sip of wine before meeting my eyes again. "I didn't come here to expose you, Lena. I came because it's time to take control. Your business, your future, it's all at risk, and you need someone who understands the game." I blinked. His words hit harder than I expected. Risk? He couldn't possibly know what was coming next. Before I could speak, the waiter appeared with dessert, but I didn't have the appetite for it. My stomach churned, twisting in a way I couldn't explain. Maximilian's presence in my life suddenly felt like a hurricane. Harris Designs, my company, was something I had worked for tirelessly, and yet it always felt like the ground beneath it was shaking, waiting to give way. Now I was learning that the very people I trusted, people like Ethan, my half-brother, my husband, might be the ones causing the cracks. I turned my attention to the door, my mind racing with possibilities. Ethan's silence had been so deafening the entire evening. His eyes, avoiding mine, said everything. He was no longer the person I married. Maximilian's hand rested on the table. His finger tapped the glass, sending soft, rhythmic sounds through the silence. "You're in danger, Lena. David's influence is everywhere. But worse? He's not the only one watching." A chill crawled down my spine. What did he mean by that? I leaned forward, suddenly feeling the weight of his words pressing on me. Who else was watching me? Maximilian stared at me, his eyes sharp, piercing. "The truth is, Lena, this isn't just about your company anymore. It's about power, and people will do anything to control it." I felt like the ground was slipping beneath me. He spoke with such authority, such knowledge of the game I was barely even playing. But now I had no choice. The rules were being set for me, and I had no idea how to move. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked, my voice shaking, my frustration spilling out in a rush. "Why wait until now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze flickered across the room before settling back on me. "You were never meant to know," he said softly, almost too softly. "But now you're in the thick of it, and you need to learn how to fight back." I swallowed hard. And what about David? Will he just let this happen? Maximilian's smile was thin, almost calculating. David won't have a choice. There it was again, the game. Power. And I, Lena Harris, was just a player in a much larger, more dangerous world than I'd ever known. Before I could digest his words, the sound of a phone buzzing broke the tension. I glanced at Maximilian's hand as it rested beside his glass. Without looking at the screen, he picked it up, his fingers swiping across it with practiced ease. His eyes flicked briefly to me, a moment of hesitation. "The game has already started," he said, barely above a whisper. "And it's already too late to turn back." I watched him, heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct told me to get up, to leave this place, this entire situation behind. But something deep inside urged me to stay. Maximilian was right. It was too late to turn back. Then, as quickly as it came, the tension broke. Maximilian stood up, adjusting his jacket with smooth precision. "Tomorrow, Lena. We'll meet tomorrow. There's much more to discuss." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, my mind racing. What was I walking into? What had I just agreed to? Maximilian's last words before he left hung in the air like a warning. "You're not just playing for your company anymore, Lena. You're playing for your life." The door shut behind him, and I was left alone, staring at my untouched dessert. The shadows in the restaurant seemed darker now. The world had shifted, and I had no idea what was about to come. But I knew this much for sure. The stakes had just gotten higher. I barely slept that night. My head was spinning, the weight of everything crashing down on me like a wave I couldn't escape. What had Maximilian meant by "the game has already started"? The dinner was just the beginning. The fear that had clawed at me in the restaurant now wrapped itself tightly around my chest. The next morning, I woke up to a silence I couldn't shake. Ethan was gone, his side of the bed untouched. The air was thick with unspoken words. I knew he'd left before, but something felt different this time. I could feel his absence in every corner of our apartment, like it was finally starting to sink in. He had been pulling away from me for weeks now, but last night's revelation was the final straw. David wasn't the only one who'd been pretending. So had Ethan. I stared at my phone for a long moment, the screen taunting me with unanswered calls. I hadn't spoken to Maximilian since last night, but I knew that was about to change. I had no choice. I texted him, "I'm in." When and where? A response came almost immediately. "Meet me at the office. We have a lot to discuss." His words didn't settle well with me, but I had no choice but to follow the trail now. Everything was at risk. My company, my marriage, my future. I took a cab to the Carter Enterprises building, the looming glass structure a reminder of the world I was about to step into. Inside, it was just as cold and sterile as the facade promised. The polished floors, the sleek steel beams, everything here was meant to intimidate, to remind you who held the power. Maximilian was already waiting in the conference room. He didn't stand when I entered, just gave a slight nod before motioning for me to sit. The room was dimly lit, the shadows falling across the table in a way that made it feel like we were in a dungeon, trapped under his control. "I'm glad you've come to your senses," Maximilian said, his voice low and smooth. "We don't have much time. David's move last night was just the start. His company is on the brink of collapse, and you, Lena, are the key to making sure it happens." I stared at him. Collapse? My mind was struggling to keep up. "What do you mean by that?" Maximilian leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. "David's empire is built on more than just money. It's built on manipulation, on control. But there's one thing he doesn't understand: his empire is fragile." I felt a tightening in my chest. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I knew it wouldn't be good. "Do you want revenge, Lena?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I swallowed hard. The word had been in my head all night. Revenge. I could feel the heat of it creeping into my bones. But was I ready to go that far? "Of course, I want to see him fall," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. The thought of David's smug face, of his condescending remarks, made my blood boil. But deep down I knew it was more than that. I needed to take him down. Maximilian smiled, as if he'd won something. "Good. I've been watching David for years. He's arrogant, reckless. The contracts he set up with suppliers, his shady dealings, they're all built on lies. But I know exactly where his weaknesses are, and I'll use them." "You'll use them?" I raised an eyebrow. How? He pushed a folder across the table. It was thick, filled with pages of legal contracts, financial reports, and confidential documents. This is everything you need to take him down. Everything. I opened the folder and scanned the pages quickly. My mind began to race. The documents were solid. Proof of David's dirty dealings, contracts he'd signed under false pretenses, supplier agreements that violated every business law on the books. I felt a surge of power, but it was laced with fear. This could destroy everything, I thought. My company, my family. Maximilian's voice cut through my thoughts. I've already started. The wheels are in motion, but you need to play your part. David's not just a rival businessman. He's an enemy, and enemies don't deserve mercy. I looked at him, my stomach churning. And what do you want in return? He met my gaze. What I want is simple. David's downfall. And your loyalty. The word echoed in my mind. Loyalty. I had no idea what I was getting into. Maximilian wasn't offering a partnership. He was offering a war. The rest of the meeting blurred by, the details lost in a haze of panic and calculation. Maximilian laid out the plan. I would gather intel, push David's companies into financial ruin, and expose him to the authorities. It was a game of chess where I would have to be the queen, ruthlessly moving forward. As I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just crossed a line. Everything was shifting, changing. My hands shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sudden realization that I was in too deep. The next morning, the tension in my chest had only grown. Ethan hadn't come home, and the silence between us had become unbearable. He wouldn't even pick up his phone. I couldn't understand it. I had just exposed a side of him I didn't even know existed. My husband, my partner, had been involved in this all along. I had to confront him. There was no other choice. I arrived at the apartment just as the sun was setting. The light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. It felt like I was walking into a trap, but I had no choice. As I opened the door, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps in the hallway. I turned, expecting to see Ethan, but instead it was Rachel, my best friend, my trusted advisor. Her eyes were wide with panic. "Lena, we need to talk. Now." Her voice was tight with fear. I didn't need any more signs. Something was horribly wrong. The game had already started, and now I was running out of time. The tension in the apartment was suffocating. Rachel's face was a mask of urgency, eyes darting to the door like she was expecting someone to walk in at any moment. My pulse raced as she stepped closer, speaking in hushed tones. "Lena, this isn't just about David anymore. This goes deeper. A lot deeper than we thought." I stood frozen, her words spinning in my head. Deeper? I had no idea what she was talking about, but the way her voice shook made it clear that whatever she was about to tell me could destroy everything. "David, he's not working alone," Rachel continued, glancing nervously at the windows. The blinds were drawn, but it didn't feel like enough to shield us from the chaos that was coming. There are people behind him. People who've been setting things in motion long before you even met Maximilian. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew the truth. Something had been off about all of this. The pieces weren't fitting. Maximilian had been too calm, too calculated. And David, his sudden breakdown? It wasn't just embarrassment. It was fear. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the weight of it. Was my entire life a lie? I don't know who, but Rachel's voice faltered. She shook her head, trying to steady herself. Maximilian's not the savior here. He's just playing his own game. And you're right in the middle of it. The word game made my skin crawl. The game I'd been forced into without even realizing it. I stepped back. "What are you saying? That Maximilian's just as bad as David?" Rachel bit her lip, glancing at the door again. She stepped closer, whispering, "I'm not sure. But I've been digging into the financials of Carter Enterprises and some of the companies they've bought out. There's a pattern, a very dangerous one." I shook my head, barely able to take it in. What do you mean? The entire thing, David's empire, it's built on dirty money, Lena. But it's not just corporate corruption. There's a lot more. These transactions, they're linked to people from your past. People who you've never met. And it's all connected to Maximilian's other businesses. My stomach twisted as the room seemed to tilt. I had always known there was something off about Maximilian, but to think he was connected to people I didn't even know, people who had been manipulating me without me even realizing? I forced my mind to focus. What does it mean for me? For Harris Designs? Rachel swallowed hard. It means you're a pawn. And this game has already started, like Maximilian said. She paused before adding, there's a reason he brought you in. And it's not just about David. It's about your future. And your company. I felt the air grow heavy around me. My legs nearly gave out, but I steadied myself. So what do we do now? Rachel's eyes darkened. We expose him. But we need to be smart. The last thing you want is to get caught in the crossfire of a battle you don't even understand. I swallowed, trying to force calm into my racing mind. Expose Maximilian? And how do we even start? Her expression hardened. We need leverage. Something Maximilian's hiding. It's there, I can feel it. And once we have it, we can destroy him. I nodded, even though fear clawed at me. Rachel was right. But what if we were already too late? What if David had already won? I didn't have time to ponder the answers. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting another text from Maximilian. Instead, the screen was filled with a single notification from an unknown number. Meet me at the office. I froze. Ethan. His message felt like a punch to the gut. But the fact that he was sending me this message, and from an unknown number, only made me more suspicious. Was he trying to warn me? Or was he pulling me into something even darker? Rachel looked at the phone in my hand, her eyes narrowing. What is it? Ethan, I muttered. The tension in the room thickened. She stared at me, eyes wide. Do you trust him? I didn't answer right away. What was left to trust? The husband who had been avoiding me? The man who had stood by while David tried to crush everything I worked for? I didn't know where Ethan stood anymore, but I had no choice. I had to meet him, and I had to know the truth. The office was eerily quiet when I arrived. I stepped inside, and the door shut behind me with a heavy click. The air felt dense, like the calm before a storm. I looked around. No one. No Ethan. Not a single person in sight. The building felt abandoned, but I knew it was just a facade. Somewhere, someone was watching. I checked my phone again, but there were no new messages. Where the hell is he? The silence in the hallway was punctuated by the echo of my own footsteps. Suddenly, I heard the soft creak of a door behind me. I turned just as a figure stepped out. It was Ethan, but something was off. He didn't look like the man I married. His expression was cold, distant, his usual warmth replaced by something calculating. Lena, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I'm glad you came. My heart skipped a beat, but I held my ground. Why did you bring me here, Ethan? What's going on? He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze flickered to the door behind him before looking back at me. It's time you knew the truth. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he opened the door fully. The sight on the other side nearly made my heart stop. Maximilian, sitting at a desk, a smug grin spreading across his face as he met my gaze. And next to him, David Carter. The room closed in on me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stood in the doorway, the sight before me almost too much to process. David Carter, Maximilian Gray, and Ethan standing between them, like a silent participant in the unraveling chaos. I felt as if the room had collapsed around me, leaving only the three of them, staring at me like I was the intruder. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, unbearable, thick with tension. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. Ethan's face was stone unreadable. Maximilian sat back in the chair, his fingers steepled in front of him, eyes cold. And David just looked at me with that same smug arrogance that had always made me feel small. I could feel my stomach churn. This wasn't the meeting I had been expecting. It wasn't even close. "You wanted the truth, Lena," Ethan finally said, his voice flat. There was no warmth in it, no trace of the man I thought I knew. Just a stranger wearing my husband's skin. "Here it is." Maximilian smiled, slow and deliberate. "I'm sure this is a lot to process, Lena, but you're in too deep now. There's no turning back." David let out a short, bitter laugh. "What's the matter, Lena? Did you think you were playing the game? Did you think you were the one in control?" I took a step back, the words cutting into me like shards of glass. My knees threatened to buckle. "What is this? What are you all doing?" Ethan looked at me with cold eyes, his gaze empty of everything I thought I could count on. "We're giving you a choice. But don't kid yourself. You don't have control anymore. We never really needed you. You were just a way in." I didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. Why would Ethan be a part of this? Maximilian, sensing my confusion, leaned forward, his voice smooth like velvet. "David's empire is crumbling, Lena. You think he's in charge? You think he's still the one pulling the strings? No, we're taking this all down, and you're going to help us." I shook my head, refusing to believe it, but deep down I felt it. The trap was closing around me. David looked at me with disdain. "You really didn't know? All these years you've been fighting for something that was never yours. Maximilian owns the game, and you're just a pawn." Maximilian's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We're not just taking David down. We're taking it all. The deals, the assets, everything. And when it's over, you'll have your piece of the pie. A seat at the table." My mind was reeling. A seat at the table. What did that even mean? My company, my legacy, everything I'd fought for, all of it was just a means to an end. I wasn't even a player. I was just being used. The room spun, and for a moment I felt like I might pass out. How did I get here? How had I gone from building a brand to being dragged into this web of deceit and manipulation? "Lena!" Maximilian's voice broke through the haze. "It's simple. You help us destroy David, and everything you've ever wanted will be yours. It's time to make a choice." I looked at Ethan, my husband, the man who had once promised to stand by me, to build a life with me. But now he stood beside Maximilian, the very man who had torn my world apart. The betrayal was suffocating. My throat tightened as the words finally broke free. You knew about all of this." My voice was raw, barely a whisper. Ethan's expression didn't change. He nodded once curtly. "I've known. I've been part of this for longer than you think." Maximilian's gaze flickered between us, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his features. "The question is, Lena, are you willing to play your part? Or will you be left behind?" The weight of the decision pressed down on me. The choice was in my hands, but I felt more helpless than ever. If I said no, if I refused to cooperate, what would happen to me? To Harris Designs? But if I agreed, what kind of person would I become? What would I be sacrificing for revenge? "Make the choice, Lena," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "You can either join us, or you can watch everything you've built burn." The room felt colder. The walls were closing in, and I had nowhere to hide. My breath came in short gasps as I struggled to process everything. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. The people I had trusted most, Ethan, my husband, and Maximilian, the man who had just torn down every illusion I'd ever had, were now offering me a seat at the table of betrayal. But what could I do? I had no other choice. If I wanted to survive this, I had to play their game. "I'll do it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I knew they were the only way out. I'll help you take him down. Maximilian's grin widened. Good, because once you're in, there's no going back. I turned, heading toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. The game had begun, and I had no idea where it would lead. The air outside felt sharper, the cold biting at my skin. The world seemed a little darker, a little more treacherous, and as I walked away from the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Always watching. The deal was done, but it had cost me more than I was willing to admit. The man I had loved, my husband, was gone, and in his place was a stranger, a man who had chosen the game over everything else. I had made my choice, but now I was left wondering if I'd just signed my own death sentence. The truth was clearer than ever. The game wasn't just about money or power. It was about something far more dangerous, loyalty. And in this game, loyalty had a price. When I was only beginning to understand. The night was cold, the wind biting as it whipped through the city streets. But inside the sleek, glass-walled penthouse, the air felt suffocating. The tension hung thick, a tangible presence that I could almost taste. Every move felt like it was being watched, every word, every breath. I couldn't escape it. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sprawling cityscape below. The lights blurred into a wash of gold and white, flickering like the remnants of a dream I had no control over. The game had changed, and I was no longer a player. Behind me, I heard the familiar footfalls of Ethan as he stepped into the room. His presence was a shadow I couldn't shake. Was he still my husband? The question seemed absurd. Of course he wasn't. Not anymore. There was no room for love in a world built on betrayal. Lena, he said, his voice just above a whisper. It was the same voice I had once trusted, the one that promised we'd fight side by side. But now, it only felt like a stranger's. We can fix this. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. There was no apology there. No regret. Only cold determination. His face was hard, more distant than I had ever seen it. The man I loved had been replaced by someone else. Someone who had been playing the game from the beginning. You don't get it, Ethan, I replied, my voice barely above a murmur. It's too late for fixing things. There's no going back now. He took a step forward, his eyes searching mine, as if he were trying to find the woman he had married. But that woman was gone. She had been swallowed whole by the monster they had created. Maximilian was right, I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. You've been part of this from the start, haven't you? Ethan's face tightened, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. This was never about just Harris Designs, Lena. This was about power. Control. He paused, his gaze flicking to the papers on the table behind me. Maximilian gave you a choice. But I'm afraid the one thing you didn't see coming was that I was never really on your side. Not in the way you thought. I felt my chest tighten as the weight of his betrayal crushed me. I had thought I was the one calling the shots. But in the end, I had been nothing more than a pawn. You think this is what I wanted? To be some tool in their game. I snapped, my voice rising. The rage I had been holding back surged to the surface. This was never about me. You made it about you. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes softening for just a moment, as if a flicker of the past still lived in him. Lena, we can take him down. Together. Just help us finish this. Together. I laughed bitterly. We were never together, Ethan. You were always one step ahead, playing a game I didn't even know existed. And I was too blind to see it. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could feel the walls pressing against me, suffocating me in the very space that once felt like home. The game was over, and I had lost. Suddenly, the phone on the table buzzed, the sharp noise cutting through the thick silence. I reached for it without thinking, my hand trembling as I read the message on the screen. It's time. Meet me at the warehouse. My heart skipped a beat. The final confrontation was here. Without a word to Ethan, I grabbed my coat and left, the cold night air slamming against my face as I walked into the city's dark streets. I didn't look back. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The warehouse loomed ahead, a cold, industrial structure that looked out of place against the glossy skyline. I felt the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me as I entered through the heavy metal doors. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound in the vast, empty space. Maximilian was already there, waiting. He stood by a metal table, his back to me, facing the shadows. His silhouette was imposing, a figure of control. "You came," he said without turning around. His voice was smooth, almost too calm. "You've made the right choice." I walked toward him slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. Everything I had feared was about to unfold, and I couldn't stop it. "I'm done, Maximilian," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. "But I'm not doing this for you. Not anymore." He finally turned to face me, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Is that so? What about David? What about your company? You think you can just walk away?" "I don't care anymore," I said, the truth finally spilling out. "You've won, but at what cost? You've destroyed everything for power, for control. And for what? So you could sit at the top of a broken empire." Maximilian's smile faded. He stepped closer, the air between us crackling with tension. "You're wrong, Lena. This isn't about power. It's about survival." I stood my ground. "And that's what you've lost, Maximilian. You've forgotten what it means to truly live." The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't a pawn. I wasn't a part of their game. "I'm done," I repeated. And this time I meant it. "I'm walking away." Maximilian said nothing. He simply turned, walking toward the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the cold, empty warehouse. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I had taken back control. Not through revenge. Not through power. But through something far more powerful. Choice. In the end, it wasn't about winning the game. It was about choosing to walk away from it entirely. And that was the greatest victory of all.